Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Dirshu Mishnah Berurah share. We are holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelek Dalid, Chelek Hey. I'm sorry, we're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelek Hey, and we are continuing to learn Hilchos Yom Tov. We are in the midst of Siman Tov Kuf Chavav. We pick up today on Kuf Mem Hey Amid Beis, in the middle of Tov Kuf Chavav Sif Aleph. We're on Kuf Mem Hey Amid Beis in the second line, by the beginning of the words of the Ramah by the Haggah. I hope to cover today Daf Kuf Mem Vav Amid Aleph, as well as the vast majority of Kuf Mem Vav Amid Beis. So, yesterday we began this Siman. We began Siman Tov Kuf Chavav, Din Mace Be Yom Tov, the halachas that pertain to handling a niftar, a mace, on Yom Tov. And in the beginning of Sif Aleph, the Mechaber told us that if somebody is niftar on the first day of Yom Tov, a Yid is not allowed to be misasek with the mace. A Yid is not allowed to do any Isurei Da'araisa to handle the mace. So, for example, we said that the Yid is not allowed to go make an aron. You're not allowed to go build a casket. You're not allowed to cut fabric to size to make tachrichin or sew tachrichin. You're not allowed to dig a kever. You're not allowed to fill in the kever after the mace is put into the kever. All of these are malachos gemuros. They would be Isurei Daraisa, and all of these are forbidden for a Yid to do on behalf of the mace on the first day of Yom Tov. However, the Mechaber told us that what you could do is you could have non-Jews do these kind of malachas to take care of the mace on the first day of Yom Tov. And as far as what a Yid could do on the first day of Yom Tov, the Mechaber told us that things that are not malachos gemuros, so for example, to go dress the mace in the tachrichin, to boil up water for the tahara, that's something that would be okay, because havara and bishul are mutter on Yom Tov l'tzarech echel nefesh, and we said the tahara is considered a tzarech ktsas, and therefore that would be mutter on Yom Tov. To be moitzi the mace, to take the mace out of the house and bring him from Rishus HaYachid through the Rishus HaRabim in order to bring him to Kfura, so that's the malacha of Haitzah. Haitzah is also on mutter on Yom Tov l'tzarech echel nefesh, and mitaysha hutra Haitzah l'tzarech, hutra nami shalai l'tzarech, as long as there's a tzarech ktsas. So these kind of things that are not malachos gemuros, or even if they are malachos, but they're malachos that are mutter on Yom Tov l'tzarech echel nefesh, and we say mitaych, those are things that even a Yid is allowed to do on Yom Tov Rishon in order to take care of a mace. Now we go to the words of the Ramah. Says the Ramah, by me it's the last word on the second line. Haggah. V'toiv li zaher, the Ramah says it is good to take care, l'taharoi, that when you do the tahara, when you're doing the tahara and you're washing down the mace, you should do the tahara al yedei kash. You should use something like straw. And the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain that this means you need to use something to wash the mace down. Normally they would use something like a cloth, like a washcloth. Over here he's saying you should use something like kash, and we'll see why. And you should do it al gav or. If you need to put the niftar, if you need to put the mace on top of something to do the tahara, you should put them on leather, which is not absorbent, on neser, or on a wooden plank, also which is not absorbent. V'lo al yedei sadinim, but you should not place the mace on top of fabric, on top of cloths. But why? Shelo yavai lidei schita, because by doing this, if you use a cloth to wash down the mace, a washcloth, or if you lay the mace on top of sadinim, on top of cloths, these items are going to become wet, and then if you squeeze them out, you're going to come to do the malacha of schita. And the schita, in this case, that's a malacha gemura, and it's not a malacha that we say mitaych on, so we're not gonna let a Yid do that on Yom Tov Rishon in order to take care of a mace. Let's take a look at the words of the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Yud Gimel. Al Yedei Kash, the words of the Ramah were that when you do the Tahara, you should do it Al Yedei Kash. You should do it with Kash. Kaloimar, the Chavetz Chaim tells us that what the Ramah wants to say over here is Letaroi al gabe or oineser v'loy al gabe begodim. you should perform the tahara with the niftar being placed on leather or on a board and not on top of begadim, clothing, items of clothing or other articles made of fabric. Uvamer yer chatzai, and what should you use to actually wash down the mace? Bekash. You should use something like straw, not something like a washcloth. V'hu adin b'yodai. Or you could just use your hand to be mishavshef, to wash down the niftar. Avaloi b'sadinin, but you should not use cloths. Why? It's cutting your dalid. Shalayavai lidei schita, so you should not come to perform the malacha of schita, of squeezing out the cloth. Afagab, the Chavetz Chaim points out an interesting question over here. The Ramah is telling me don't use cloth, because if you use cloth, you might come to the malacha of schita. Why? The cloth is going to become wet. Then you're going to want to squeeze the cloth out. That would be the malacha of schita. Asks the Chavetz Chaim, l'chayra, there's another problem that happens before the schita problem. And that is, if you put the niftar in water and you put cloth underneath the niftar, that means you're soaking the cloth in water. Now, soaking a cloth in water is kibus. That's the malach of laundering, of washing. We say shriyasai hikviyasai. Soaking it is akin to washing it. You don't have to agitate or scrub a cloth in order for it to be considered the malacha of kaives. Once you soak it in water, that's already the malacha of kaives. So why does the Ramah tell me don't use cloth? Because you might come to schita. The instant you put the cloth in the water, you already came to kaives. So why doesn't he mention that? Let's see it inside. Says the Chavetz Chaim here, a nice cut in your dalid. Even though once you soak the cloth in water, yesh by mishum kibus, you already come to the malacha of kibus, ukedelael b'sivin shin beis, like we learned in Hilchos Shabbos in shin beis sivtes. So it seems inappropriate that the Ramah is mentioning the malacha of schita, which you're only going to encounter after you already encountered the malacha of kibus. Yesh lamar, you could say that the reason the Ramah did this is because normally when they wash down a mace by the tahara, you would expect that they're using clean and white garments. There are many shittas that hold that if you take a clean cloth and you soak it, we don't say shriyasai zuhi kibusai. We don't say that soaking it is akin to washing it. By something that's clean, we don't say that just because you soak it in water, this is kibus. It's clean. It doesn't even require kibus. So it could be that you would never encounter the malacha of kibus. But you still would have a problem of schita. Even by a clean and white cloth, we say if you squeeze it out, that's the malacha of schita. And certainly in the case of a tahara, once you do the tahara and you use these cloths as part of the tahara process, they're going to become soiled. So now when you squeeze it out, you're certainly encountering the malacha of schita. That's going to encourage you to squeeze it out. You want to squeeze out all the dirty water. And that would also be kibus. So when you encounter the schita, you're also going to encounter kibus. But originally, when you just put the cloth in the water, you might not encounter the malacha of kibus, because if it's fresh and clean and white, then we don't say shriyasai hi kibusai. We don't say that just by virtue of the fact that you soak it in water, you're automatically being over on the malacha, performing the malacha of kibus. Now we go to Sif Beis, bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch. Meis b'Yom Tov Rishon. Now, just by way of hakdama, I should just point out that in Sif Dalid, which we'll see later in the shir, in Sif Dalid, we're going to say that on Yom Tov Sheni, a yid is allowed to be misasik with a mace. The lashon of the mechaber is going to be Yom Tov Sheni legabe mace kechol shavua rabbanon. The Chazal made Yom Tov Sheni like a weekday when it comes to taking care of a mace. So we're going to see that a yid is allowed to be misasik with a mace on Yom Tov Sheni. So now there might be a temptation if somebody has a mace that has to be cared for on Yom Tov Rishon. He might say to himself, you know what? Instead of having non-Jews being misasik with the mace on Yom Tov Rishon, which is not so much a kavod hameis to have the non-Jews taking care of the mace. You know what? We'll let the mace sit on Yom Tov Rishon. We'll wait till Yom Tov Sheni, and on Yom Tov Sheni, we'll let the Yidden be misasik with the mace. That's the basis for this halacha here in Siv Beis. Says the Mechaber, mace be Yom Tov Rishon. If somebody is niftar on Yom Tov Rishon, Aser lahalino ad Yom Tov Sheni, you are not allowed to leave him and just let him sit on Yom Tov Sheni until Yom Tov Sheni, kedei sheyisasku ba Yisrael, so that we should wait till Yom Tov Sheni and let Yidden be misasik with the mace on Yom Tov Sheni. You're not allowed to do that. Says the Mishnah Berurah in his Katan Tezvav, Aser lahalinoi, you're not allowed to let the mace sit. Why? The mutav sheyikberu akum b'yom rishon. It is better that non-Jews should take care of the mace on Yom Tov Rishon. V'hu shvus she'ein by maisa. That's an iser d'Rabbanan. It's a mirula akum. Let's say you ask a non-Jew to go ahead and dig a kever on Yom Tov Rishon so that you could bury the mace on Yom Tov Rishon. Okay, so the yid is the yid is doing a mirula akum, which is a shvus. It's an iser d'Rabbanan. And it's aimed by Maisa. The Yid is not doing any kind of malach at all. It's Dibor Ba'alma. All he's doing is instructing the non-Jew. So it's better that the mace should be taken care of on Yom Tov Rishon through Amir La'akum, which is Shvush She'ein by Maisa, Misha Yikbaru Yisraelim. It's better to do that than that Yisraelim should actually do a Maisa on Yom Tov Sheni, V'yav Rashvus B'yadayim. If a Yid does the malacha, if a Yid is going to go dig a kever on Yom Tov Sheni, so yes, we allow that. We're going to see in Sif Dalet that on Yom Tov Sheni, a Yid is allowed to do all the tzarchei hameis on Yom Tov Sheni. He could dig a kever, he could sow tachrichim. All of these things a Yid is allowed to do on Yom Tov Sheni, but they're all isurei d'Rabbanan, and they're all a shvush sheyesh by Maisa. Over there, a Yid is transgressing an issa d'Rabbanan b'yadayim. He's actually doing a Maisa. So the Mechaber is telling me over here in Siv Beis, it's better that the mace should be taken care of with Amir La'akum, which is a shvush she'ein by Maisa on Yom Tov Rishon, than he should be taken care of by a Yid on Yom Tov Sheni with a shvush she'yesh by Maisa. Now, it happens to be that there's a machlekes rishonim how to understand this halacha, why it is that there's an isser of letting the mace wait on Yom Tov Rishon to Yom Tov Sheni. The Mechaber and the way the Mishnah Berurah learns, the reason is because of Isser Yom Tov. That's why it's Usser. It's Usser to let the mace wait on to let the mace sit on Yom Tov Rishon, so that Yidden should do it on Yom Tov Sheni. Why? Because of Isurei Yom Tov. Because we don't want you to bring about a situation where Yidden are going to do a Shvush Yesh by Maisa on Yom Tov Sheni. There are others that learn that it's because of Kavod HaMeis. We're not going to let the mace sit b'bezayin on Yom Tov Rishon to wait so that Yidden should take care of him on Yom Tov Sheni. Better let the Goyim take care of him on Yom Tov Rishon. But that's not the way we're learning over here. Now we go to the bottom line in the Mishnah Berurah, is Katan Tezayin. The reason you wanted to let the mace sit was Kedei Sheyisasku ba Yisrael. Says the Mishnah Berurah, there could be another reason why you want to let the mace sit. Maybe you want to let the mace sit on Yom Tov Rishon so that the Levaya should take place on Yom Tov Sheni, and the family of the niftar should be able to be malava the mace outside of the tchum. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, that's also not a reason to let the mace sit on Yom Tov Rishon. Umashman, the implication is that even if you're dealing over here with a Talmud Chacham, and you would think it's definitely a much bigger kavod hameis for a Talmud Chacham that he should be handled by Yidden, we don't wait from Yom Tov Rishon to Yom Tov Sheni. There are those achrayim shekasu that right. That if you do wait for Yom Sheni, lo yikaver al yedei Yisrael el al yedei Akum. If you did this, if you did wait until Yom Tov Sheni, then there's kind of like a knas. You don't let Yidden be misasik with the mace on Yom Tov Sheni, only non-Jews. There's a lengthy bir halacha over here who takes issue with this. Okay, now let's go to the top line of the Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph with the Mechaber and Siv Gimel. So far, we've been talking about Yom Tov. So we spoke so far about Yom Tov Rishon. And we said that on Yom Tov Rishon, a Yid is not allowed to be misasik. He's not allowed to do a malacha gemura for the mace. He's only allowed to do things that would be Yisurei D'Rabbanan. But you're allowed to have a non-Jew do even a malacha gemura, like actually taking a kever on Yom Tov Rishon. Now says the Mechaber, b'Shabbos u'b'Yom Kippurim. If you're dealing with a mace on Shabbos or a mace on Yom Kippur, lo yisasku by klal afilu al yedei amamin. Then you cannot even have a non-Jew do malacha of any kind for the mace on Shabbos or Yom Kippur. Afilu lo hitziyah al yedeihem ulahanichai b'kuch. Even just to have non-Jews take the niftar out and put him into a kever that was already dug. Even that you're not allowed to do. What's a kuch? It says here in parentheses, pirish b'chafira, a dug-out kever. Ha'asui me'esmel, that was already made yesterday. So on Shabbos and Yom Kippur, we don't make any heter over here at all. Even though on Yom Tov, we're mater amir la'akum, we're mater a yid to do things that would be Yisurei D'Rabbanan. Shabbos and Yom Kippur, we're not mater anything. Now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah intimates at least one reason for this differentiation. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cotton Yud Zayin. Afilu lo yitziyah al yedehem ulahanichai b'koch. Avagav de'ena yalatilto al yedei nachri. What isurim are involved in asking a non-Jew to go ahead and be metaltal the mace? If we're not dealing with real haitzah, if we're not dealing with moving the mace from a rishus hayachid to a rishus harabim, if we're dealing with Yisurei D'Rabbanan, so what's involved in taking the mace and placing him into a kever, into a grave that was already dug? These are only Yisurei D'Rabbanan, and it's Amir La'akum. So it's like a shvus to shvus. Avagav de'ena yela tiltal al yedei nachri. All this is tiltal D'Rabbanan, and you're doing it but through Amir La'akum. Still, Lairotzu lahater mishum kavod hameis. The Chazal will not matter this for kavod hameis reasons. The other rabbi, because they said punkt fakert. Kavod hameis, it's a greater kavod for the mace. Shelo yischalal Shabbos v'Yom Kippurim techamiri al yodai. That Shabbos and Yom Kippur, which are so chamor, that these should not be nischalal for the mace. Now, the lashon of the Ramban questions, why do we make such a huge difference here between Yom Tov and Shabbos? Why is it that Yom Tov we have all these heterim, and Shabbos and Yom Kippur we don't? He gives 4 different reasons. But one of the reasons that the Ramban brings is this. The Ramban says it's not kavod hameis. People are going to say, this mace, ploini chilel Shabbos b'yom misasai. He was mechal Shabbos through his death. So that's not a kavod hameis. That's one of the reasons the Ramban gives. Another reason the Ramban gives is he says there's not such a zilzul Yom Tov if we're mater things on Yom Tov l'kavod hameis. Because we know we're already mater malacha for tzarech hechel nefesh. You're allowed to make a fire on Yom Tov for tzarech hechel nefesh. You're allowed to cook on Shabbos for tzarech hechel nefesh. So we see that there are already heterim on Yom Tov. So to be mater something for the kavod hameis is not going to cause a zilzul Yom Tov. But to be mater Shabbos, to be mater malacha on Shabbos, even through Amir La'akum, that's going to cause a zilzul of Shabbos and Yom Kippur, and we're not willing to do that. Let me just finish off this Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud Zayin. V'chol prate din zeh mavor le'el b'Siman Shin Yud Aleph Ayin Sham. The Mishnah Berurah sends us back to Hilchos Shabbos to Siman Shin Yud Aleph, where we have more of these halachas in greater detail. Now let's go to the Mechaber in Siv Dalet, second line, Kuf Mem Vav Amud Aleph. B'Yom Tov Sheni. So far, we dealt with Yom Tov Rishon, we dealt with Shabbos, we dealt with Yom Kippur. How about Yom Tov Sheni? B'Yom Tov Sheni, says the Mechaber, Yisasku ba Yisrael, Yidden could be misasik with the niftar. Afilu b'Yom Sheni shel Rosh Hashanah, and this is true even on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. The Chiddush over here, like we've said many times, Rosh Hashanah, the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah are not like the 2 days of Yom Tov Sheni shel Golius. The 2 days of Yom Tov Sheni shel Golius, the second day is only Sveika D'Yoma, and we consider them to be 2 different types of Kedusha. But the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, that's a Kedusha Arichta. Over there, we treat it like all one Kedusha, the 2 days. So in a way, you might look at it, you might say that by Rosh Hashanah, there should be no difference at all between Yom Rishon and Yom Sheni. It's Kedusha Arichta, it's one long Kedusha. Says the Mechaber in the context of this halacha not. B'Yom Tov Sheni, Yisasku ba Yisrael, afilu b'Yom Sheni Rosh Hashanah. On Yom Tov Sheni, even if it's Yom Tov Sheni shel Rosh Hashanah, a Yid is allowed to be misasik with a niftar, va'afilu lo yishtahe. And this is true even if the mace is not sitting for a long time. So we don't have to be chayshish shema yasriach. We don't have to worry that the mace is decomposing and there's going to be a terrible bizayin mace. Still, a yid is allowed to be misasik with the mace. Afilu lachtech hadas mehamechuber, even to do something like cut a hadas that's growing from the ground. That's certainly a malacha gemura. That's something that would be an issa daraisa on Shabbos, to cut a hadas. Even that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov Sheni. V'lasis like tachrichin, or to actually sew tachrichin. V'arayin, or to fashion a casket. V'lachsev like kever, or to dig a kever. All of these are malachos gemuros, and still a yid is allowed to do them on Yom Tov Sheni for a mace. Ulechamim lemayim, certainly to boil up water, l'taharoi for the tahara, v'ligzos leisarai, to cut his hair. All of these things you're allowed to do. Ve'emein ba'isa ir b'kaim kavaros liYisrael, and if you don't have a Yiddish cemetery, a Yiddish Beis HaChaim over here in town, you could transport the mace to a different city, even if you have to transport him out of the tchum to bring him to a Yiddish Beis HaChaim. You could hire a boat to go transport him to another place. And all of these things are mutter to Yom Tov Sheni l'gabe mace kechol shavua rabbanon. Because Yom Tov Sheni, when it comes to a mace, the Chazal made Yom Tov Sheni like a weekday. Now let's just turn the page here to Kuf Mem Vav Amud Beis. Va'afilu efshar ba'amamin, and even if you have non-Jews over here who could do all of these things, Yisasku ba Yisrael. The sheet of the Mechaber is, even if you have non-Jews, it's okay. Let a Yid do all of these things, even malachis gemuros, for the mace on Yom Tov Sheni, even if it's Yom Tov Sheni Rosh Hashanah. Okay, we read a lot of Mechaber over here. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cotton yud ches. The Mechaber said, "Afilu lachtech lehadas." You're even allowed to go cut a hadas. Says the Mishnah Berurah, why would you cut a hadas? There were places where they had the minig to go put a branch of a hadas on top of the mace. I think, if memory serves, that was because the hadas has a reach toiv. It has a pleasant smell to take away from the unpleasant odor of the mace. I think that's why. Even though this is certainly not a tzorich of kvura, you don't need to do this for burial purposes. It's only kavod hameis. Still in all, you're allowed to do it, even though it's a malacha gemura. A Yisrael is allowed to do it for the mace on Yom Tov Sheni. He could fashion tachrichin. Lachtoich, he could cut the fabric to size. V'litvar, he could sew. Even though really you don't even have to do these things. You could just take a bolt of linen and wrap the mace in a bolt of linen. You don't have to actually cut it up and actually sew it into clothing, into tachrichin. Still, kavod hameis, you're allowed to do this on Yom Tov. Nevertheless, if somebody happens to have tachrichim of the right size for the mace, you shouldn't go fashion new ones on Yom Tov. We saw the same concept yesterday. If you have tachrichim, but they need to be washed, you're allowed to wash them. You're allowed to fashion a casket. And if you don't have boards to build the casket out of, you're allowed to fashion boards in order to make boards to make the casket. Where this is discussed in greater detail. Ice cotton chaf aleph, yeah. Like kever, you're allowed to go dig out a kever. There are those that write to become makkah, even though the Mechaber is giving us all of these heterim, and the Mechaber is telling us we're allowed to do all of these malachis gemurais on Yom Tov Sheni for the mace. To become makkah, there are those that say that nevertheless, if we can lessen the degree of chilul Yom Tov, we should. And therefore, kasva, they write, in a place where there's a chevra kadisha, and they're the ones that generally dig the kvarim, v'litvar, and they're the ones who generally sow the tachrichim, v'lasik, and they're the ones who generally do all of these kind of malachas. Nobody else should join. Sometimes you have people who want to join the chevra, they want to be mechaber a particular mace. somebody that they were very close to or something else, they say, let me join. I want to join with the chevra and the tahara. I want to go be misasik and digging the kever. On Yom Tov, only the ones who generally do it should do it, because we want to lessen the chil Yom Tov. Why are you going to be Michal Yom Tov if the chevra is here to be Michal Yom Tov? Unless we happen to be dealing, let's say, with a case where Yom Tov fell out on Friday and it's close to nightfall, so then we want all the help we can get. Then it's very important that we finish up the kvura and all of the malacha as early as possible. We want to make sure we don't chas v'shalom come to Chil Shabbos. So then we let other people help. However, many other achronim take a much more lenient line here, and they say, like they take the words of the Mechaber very literally here. They say Yom Tov Sheni L'Gabe Meis is kechayil. It's like a weekday, so we don't have these issues. Then the Mechaber said, if you don't have a Beis HaChayim in that city, you could transport the mace to a different city, even out of the Tchum. There's no Beis HaKvaris in that city. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Avalim Yesh Beis HaKvaris, but if there is a Beis HaChayim in that city, Elo Shehud Tzival if they Moisai, just the mace said before he died, he commanded that he wants to be buried in a particular Beis HaChayim near his family members. For that desire of the niftar, you're not Mechal Yom Tov. However, since it is a very big Indian to be Mekayim Divrei Ames, in that case, you let the mace sit until after Yom Tov, and then you bury him in the Beis HaChayim where he wanted to be. If you're afraid to do this because it looks like the mace is going to decompose and there's going to be a gefer lecha b'zayin ha-mace, then then you bury him in the city where he is on Yom Tov, despite the fact that he commanded that he should be brought to the Beis HaChayim where his family is. The Mechaber said you could hire a boat. It doesn't have to be a wagon. It doesn't have to be a boat. It could be talking about a wagon. To transport him to the Beis HaChayim. It could even be the behema of a yid. That's even though there are those that hold that there's a halacha of shvisas behemtai on Yom Tov, you could even use the behema of a yid. However, only those who are going to actually be misasek in the kvura, only those people should go on the boat or on the wagon. But others who want to come just to be malava the mace, asurim, they're not allowed to go on Yom Tov. We will discuss this in greater detail in Siv Zayin. The Mechaber said that Yom Tov Sheni is kechol shavua rabbanon. Yom Tov Sheni, the Chazal made mamish like a weekday when it comes to a mace. Says the Mishnah Berurah something very important here. When we call Makkah, nevertheless, despite this lashon that the Mechaber uses, where the Mechaber says that the Chazal made Yom Tov Sheni mamish like a weekday, says the Chavetz Chaim not so fast. When we call Makkah, mamish, it's not mamish like a weekday. The chol davar she'aser b'chol hamayid, anything that we're going to learn later in Hilchas Chol Hamayid, anything that you're not allowed to do for a mace on Chol Hamayid, also b'Yom Tov Sheni mikol shkein, is certainly aser on Yom Tov Sheni. In Hilchas Chol Hamayid, we learn that there are things that you're not allowed to do for a mace even on Chol Hamayid. So we didn't make Yom Tov Sheni less than Chol Hamayid. We reduced Yom Tov Sheni to the level of Chol Hamayid, but not mamish like a weekday. And he gives a couple of examples here. Kigoyin, for example, lachtzay vavonim lekever. Let's say the place where they're burying is a place where it's very stony. It's not a place where you dig a kever in the dirt. You mamish have to go chop up stones to make, I'm not sure how you pronounce this word in English, C-A-I-R-N, a cairn. That's a kever that's in the stone. So if you have to take a pickaxe and you mamish have to start chopping up stones, you're not allowed to do that on Chol Hamayid, and you're not allowed to do it on Yom Tov Sheni. We said you're allowed to build a casket, even though it's a malacha gemura. We even said if you don't have boards, you're allowed to fashion boards in order to build a casket. But now let's take it out another step. Let's say you don't even have wood to fashion boards. Could you go out into the forest and start cutting down trees? No, that you're not even allowed to do for a mace on Chalamayid. So you're not allowed to do that on Yom Tov Sheni either. The Asr b'Chalamayid, these things are Asr on Chalamayid. Kiv'chamavur b'Siman Tov Kuf Mem Zayin v'hu adin hacha. They're Asr on Chalamayid, and they're also Asr on Yom Tov Sheni. Now, the reason why these things are Asr, even though we're matir, other malachas gemurais, chopping down a tree is no more of a malacha gemura than building a casket. Building a casket is tikkun maneh. Sewing tachrichin is the malacha of teifer. These are malachis gemurais. They're not any less malachis than cutting down a tree. However, these are mutter on Yom Tov Sheni. Cutting down a tree is asr on Yom Tov Sheni, and it's asr on Chalamayid. And I believe the reason we're going to see later in the Chalamayid is because these mamish look to people like malachis that you're not doing l'tzarech hameis. Somebody who sees you in the forest cutting down trees does not think that you're doing something l'tzarech hameis. Somebody who sees you building a casket, you're doing something l'tzarech hameis. You're chopping down trees, that looks like a tzarech chayil. That much, and it's so barabim and so b'farhesia. That is such a malacha that we're not willing to be matter that, not even on Chalamayid, certainly not on Yom Tov Sheni. Continues the Mishnah Berurah by me, it's 3 lines down. The Gam Mavur Sham, it's also explained over there in Hilchas Chalamayid, the linsar eitzim lekroshim lasais mehen arain, that to fashion boards in order to make a casket, that's something that we said is mutter on Yom Tov Sheni. However, v'liktzais hadasim, or to cut hadas branches that we said you're allowed to do, v'litvar tachrichin ukahai gavna, or the sewing of the tachrichin or other such malachas that we said are mutter on Yom Tov Sheni, according to the Mechaber, einay mutter rak b'chatseroi shel meis. They're only mutter if you do them in the chatzar of the mace, if you do it nearby, close by to the niftar. Or a similar such situation, so that it's clear to people that you're doing this on behalf of a mace. So if there's a mace in the house and you're in the courtyard and you're cutting hadasim or you're building a casket, so people know there's a mace, you're doing it l'tzarech hameis. If you're doing it in the parking lot of the funeral home, people understand you're doing it l'tzarech hameis. But if you don't do it anywhere near the mace, then people question what's going on. Then it would not be mutter. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. There's another case where you're allowed to do this, not near, close by to the mace. Uba adam meforsim shemeis. If a very well-known person died, I have to mention, our limud HaTorah should maybe be a schus. We lost today Nebuch, another Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Biesel, the longtime Rosh Yeshiva of the RJJ high school, the RJJ Mesivta, and Beis Medrash in Edison, New Jersey, was niftar today. The neshama should have an aliyah. So, if a very well-known person passed away, then then you're allowed to do malacha even in the street. Because everybody knows that you're doing malacha for the mace. Everybody heard about the mace. Everybody heard that this well-known person passed away. So they see you doing malacha. They understand you're doing it on behalf of the mace. And it is further explained over there in Hilchas Chalamayid, if you have a town with a very small Jewish population, then then even for a plain person, you're allowed to do all these malachas even if it is not close by to the mace. Why? Because since there's a very small town, a very small Yiddish population here, when one person dies, when one Yid dies in the shtat, everybody's aware of it because it's a very small group. Whether or not you're allowed to travel outside of the tchum, not with a mace. There's a mace in another town outside of the tchum. You want to go travel outside of your tchum to go pick up that mace and bring the mace here for kvura. Or you want to bring tachrichin or a casket to the mace. So you don't have a mace here. You want to travel outside of your tchum to bring something to the mace. We will discuss those cases in Sif Ches. Okay, so that covers the Shita of the Mechaber. Now we go to the top line of the Shulchan Aruch over here to the words of the Ramah, where the Ramah has a dissenting opinion. Says the Ramah, Haga, Aval ba'Ashkenaz u'v'medinais elu in the region of Ashkenaz and in our Medina, says the Ramah, Ein Noihagin Kain, we're not noyig like all of these heterim that the Mechaber just gave on Yom Tov Sheni. Ella, rather, what's our minig, says the Ramah, Kal Heicha de Efsher Ba'amamin, whatever you can do through a non-Jew, Oisin, you do. Oisin HaKever, you dig the kever, v'ha'arayin, and you build the arayin, v'tachrichin, and you sow the tachrichin, al yedei amamin. If you could do these malachis gemurais through a non-Jew, you should use a non-Jew. U'sha'ara dvarim, but the other malachis that are not malachis gemurais, oisim yisraelim kamay b'yom tov rishon. Then Yidden could do them on Yom Tov Sheni, the same way we said you could do them on Yom Tov Rishon. That the Ramah is not arguing on. What the Mechaber said yesterday, that a Yid is allowed to do Isurei Derabanan even on Yom Tov Rishon, that the Ramah agrees with. The question is here on Yom Tov Sheni. The Mechaber was very makel on Yom Tov Sheni. The Mechaber said Yom Tov Sheni is like Chalamayid when it comes to a mace. So you could even do Malachis, a Yid could even do Malachis Gemurais on Yom Tov Sheni for the mace. Says the Ramah, that's not our minig. Rather, on Yom Tov Sheni, Malachis Gemurais should be done through a non-Jew, like on Yom Tov Rishon, and a Yid should do the Malachis that are not Malachis Gemurais, the Yisuri D'Rabbanan, again, like Yom Tov Rishon. Avalim lo yefsher ba'amamin, the difference between Yom Tov Sheni and Yom Tov Rishon is, though, Avalim lo yefsher ba'amamin, on Yom Tov Sheni, if it's not possible for you to get these things done through a non-Jew, then mutalas esakol al yidei Yisrael, then it's like the Mechaber. Then you should do everything through a Yisrael. Let's pause over there for a moment. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut and kafei, ela kol heicha de efsher ba'amamin. The Ramah says if it's possible to use a non-Jew, however, the Chavetz Chaim cautions us, the dafka sheyesh hamamin lefanenu, this requirement of the minig that the Ramah is saying, that if it's possible to do the malacha gemura through a non-Jew, we should use a non-Jew, that's only if we have non-Jews here to do it. Right now, but if we have to wait several hours until a non-Jew is going to come, and now it's going to come a situation of bizoy ames, lini puach, the mace is going to start to blow up, or some other type of bizoy ames situation, then even according to the Ramah, there's no need to wait. The Yisasku by Yisrael, and the Yid should be Misasku with the mace. The Ramah said that our minig is that we should do these malachis gemuras through a non-Jew, just like on Yom Tov Rishon, Kamei Yom Tov Rishon. When we come up, nevertheless, Kasra Achronim, the Achronim, right? The mutter, here's another difference, even according to the Ramah, between Yom Tov Rishon and Yom Tov Sheni. That on Yom Tov Sheni, mutter l'taroi b'sadin kedarkoi. If you remember at the outset of this year, we said that on Yom Tov Rishon, one of the things that you have to be careful of is that when you do the tahara, you should not use cloths because of schita, because of kibus. Now over here, the Chavetz Chaim is telling us that even according to the Ramah, who says that we should treat Yom Tov Sheni like Yom Tov Rishon, mikamaka and kasra achronim, the achronim right, the mutal tahara besadin kedarkai, you could do the tahara with a cloth in the usual fashion. We're not geyser that you might come to schita. Rak sheyizar, just you should take care. Shalayas schita biyadayim. Don't actually do schita, but you could use a cloth to go ahead and do the tahara, and we're not going to be chayshish that you might do schita. Venerally, the Chavetz Chaim says, it seems to me, use clean towels, because if not, again, we're going to have the problem that we mentioned at the outset of this year, that shriyasa kibusai. If you're dealing with a dirty towel, as soon as you stick it in the water, you're performing the malacha of kibus. Cutting your dollar, like we said at the outset of this year, and Mr. Berurah is cutting your dollar. And another heter on Yom Tov Sheni, even according to the Ramah, you could be malav the mace outside of the tchum, or could come on b'sivav, like we're going to see in sivav. Afagav the Yom Tov Rishon also, even though that's forbidden on Yom Tov Rishon. To become makam le'avi malacha, because it's not a malacha. Okay, says now we go back to the words of the Mechaber. By me, it's 4 lines down the middle of the line. So we have the Mechaber. The Mechaber is very makel on Yom Tov Sheni. The Mechaber says Yom Tov Sheni, a Yid could even perform malacha gemura on part of the mace. Then we interjected with the words of the Ramah. The Ramah says our minig is not like this kula. of the Mechaber, and essentially we treat Yom Tov Rishon like essentially we treat Yom Tov Sheni like Yom Tov Rishon, with the exception of these exceptions that the Chavetz Chaim just said. Now we continue with the words of the Ramah, with the words of the Mechaber, right by the Ois Katan Chav Zayin for the Mishnah Berurah, 4 lines down in the middle of the line. Continues the Mechaber, and he says, even though I was Mekel, and I told you you could do all of these malachas gemuris on Yom Tov Sheni, chutz min akipa shebainim ala kever. However, you're not allowed to build a stone structure on top of the kever. She'ein bainin oisah b'Yom Tov. That you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chav Zayin, chutz min akipa, hainu shayadarkam live nois binyan. Their derech, their minig was to build a stone binyan on top of the kever after they did the kvura. That, says the Mechaber, you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov Sheni, even according to him. V'zeu also, says the Chavetz Chaim, even according to the Mechaber, kevin shekvar nikbar, because the mace is already buried. Lama lanu l'chal Yom Tov. The mace is already buried. So what are you doing now, being l'chal Yom Tov, by building a stone structure on top of his kever? Even the Mechaber is not going to be matter that at Yom Tov Sheni. Continues, now we go to the words of the Ramah, 5 lines down, right by the Ois Katan Chav Ches for the Mishnah Berurah. Haga, aval muter l'chasoisai ba'afar kedarkoi b'chol. But you are allowed to cover up the mace with afar, with dirt, kedarkoi b'chol. What the Ramah means over here is you are allowed to bury the mace, you're allowed to fill in the kever, and you're allowed to continue filling in the kever until you make the mound. We know when we do a kvura, we don't just stop when the dirt is flush. We keep on putting in dirt until we have a mound that is boilet, that protrudes above ground level. So the Ramah is telling me that you're allowed to do that on Yom Tov. And let's take a look in the Mishnah. Let's finish the Ramah first. You're allowed to fill in the dirt the same way you do it during the week to make the mound. Not like those that are machmir and say you cannot do this. Came near a lead. The Ramah says that's the way it seems to me. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah here is you're allowed to cover up the mace with dirt. Even the way we're noyeg, that we keep on adding dirt until we have a mound. To gemar kvuruhu, because that is considered part of the kvura. That's the completion of the act of kvura. We don't say that that's an extra, like the building of the stone. Umashma mistimas Ramah, the Chavetz Chaim is medayik in the Ramah. If you notice, the Ramah's first comment on the Mechaber, the Mechaber gave us all of his kulas on Yom Tov Sheni. He told us all the ways that he's mekel on Yom Tov Sheni, all the malachas gemuris that you're allowed to do on Yom Tov Sheni. And the Ramah said, no, we're not noyeg that way. We're noyeg that we treat Yom Tov Sheni like Yom Tov Rishon. Then the Mechaber said, one thing you're not allowed to do is you're not allowed to build the kippah on top. Now the Ramah comes and the Ramah says, but you're allowed to fill in the kever and even make the mound. He didn't mention that, anything about that in his first comment. So says the Chavetz Chaim over here, Umashma mistimas Ramah, from the way the Ramah writes it is implied that afilu leminhagenu demachmerinon b'malachos gemuros lasais ayidei akum, even according to our minig that the Ramah said that we don't do a malacha gemura on Yom Tov Sheni, mikol makom bazeh lo nagu lahachmir. With this, we are not noyeg to be machmir. With this, on Yom Tov Sheni, you don't have to be machmir. You could fill in the kever, and you could even fill it in all the way up to making a mound. That, even a yid is allowed to do on Yom Tov Sheni. Because again, take a look at the first comment of the Ramah. The Ramah said, you dig the kever, the ha'arayin, you build the arayin, the tachrichin, you sow the tachrichin, ayidei amamin. All of those things over there, the Ramah said, our minig is we do those through a non-Jew. But over here, the Ramah says, over here, he says, you're allowed to cover up the mace with dirt the same way you do it during the week. So that means that a yid on Yom Tov Sheni is allowed to fill in the kever. If a yid was not allowed to fill in the kever, so first of all, the Ramah in his first comment should have said that a yid is not allowed to fill in the kever. And also over here, where he's saying that it's mutter, if he means that it's only mutter to fill in the kever according to the Machaber, he should say so. He should say it's mutter according to the Machaber, but not according to our minute. So the implication is that this is mutter even according to the Ramah. A yid is allowed to do this on Yom Tov Sheni. Okay. A little bit more we're going to do over here. Let's finish off this sif. So let's continue now back with the words of the Mechaber. By me, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up near the beginning of the line in the Shulchan Aruch. Bamed dvarim amurim. When are all of these things mutter? Kisharoitzim likavroi by bayoy. The Mechaber says, when am I matir all of this malacha on Yom Tov Sheni? When you're planning on making the kvura today on Yom Tov. But let's say you're not doing the kfura today. Let's say somebody died on Yom Tov Sheni, and you said, no, we can't make the kfura today. We have to let the family know. People have to come to the lavaya. So we're not making the kfura today. So then, then you don't do any surah malacha on Yom Tov. You're not doing the kfura today anyway. Aval tiltal mutter. But simple tiltal, that would be mutter. Let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah here. If you're not going to do the kvura today, where you're going to let the mace stay unburied, because it's a big covenant mace, a normal avaya tomorrow after Yom Tov, or if the mace passed away near the end of Yom Tov, so you're not doing a kvura today on Yom Tov anyway, there's no time to bury him, then you don't do malacha on Yom Tov for the mace. Later on in Sifches, we're going to see there are times when it is mutter to do certain malachas to start the process of taking care of the mace on Yom Tov, so that the kvura should happen faster during the week. V'sham Yisbar will describe that in greater detail later in Sivches. Aiskat Lamed, the Mechaber said, "Aval tiltal mutter," but simple tiltal of the mace, handling the mace is mutter. Afilu al yidei Yisrael, even for a yid. The ein bechlal zeh hoitzah, but not to perform the malacha of hoitzah. You can't take the mace out of the house from a rishus hayachid to a rishus harabim. That's not what the Mechaber means when he says that tiltal of the mace is mutter, even if you're not doing the kvura today. It would even be asur to transport the mace from a rishus harabim to a kamelis, which is only an issa d'rabbanan. The achrayim seem to reach a conclusion that even tiltal of the mace is not mutter, even on Yom Tov Sheni, if you're not doing the kvura on that day. If you're doing the tiltal l'tzarech hachayim, for the needs of the people who are living, not for the needs of the mace. Kigoyin, for example, l'fanoisayim and abayis, you want to remove the mace from the house, kedesha kohanim yichdesu l'abayis, so that kohanim should be able to come into the house. So you're not doing that l'kavod mace, you're doing that l'kavod hachay. That kind of tiltal is not even mutter for a yid to do, or even to have a non-Jew do it, even on Yom Tov Sheni, because it's not l'kavod mace, it's l'kavod hachay. I'm in agmas nefesh, or you just want to remove the mace because it's causing people agmas nefesh. Elim kain shu tzarech hameis. It has to be tzarech hameis. Kigon mechama l'tzeil. Let's say you want to move the mace from a sunny place to a shady place, so it shouldn't be masriach. Ukai gavna. And even that is not mutter according to our minig, unless you put a piece of bread on the mace or a child on the mace. Like we learned in the Shabbos at Shin Yud Aleph, Sif Aleph. Okay, let's just read the words of the Ramah that finish off Sif Daled. V'din kriya shma utfila imes laimes b'yom tov rishon oisheni. We know that an oinein, somebody whose close relative died, and the kvura, the responsibility of taking care of the mace of the kvura, is upon him. He's called an oinein, and an oinein is pater from mitzvahs. So an oinein doesn't say kriya shma, an oinein doesn't daven. There's a lot of mitzvahs that an oinein doesn't do. Says the Rabbah, the din kriya shma utfila imes laimes b'yom tov rishon oisheni. What's the din of an oinein? You have an oinein, the mace died on Yom Tov Rishon. On Yom Tov Rishon, it's hard to say that the responsibility of the kvura is on him. He's not allowed to do the kvura on Yom Tov Rishon. A yid is not allowed to do kvura on Yom Tov Rishon. So is he an oinen? Or does he say Kriya Shema and Tefillah? What happens if it's Yom Tov Sheni? On Yom Tov Sheni, do we say that now the responsibility of the Kvura is mutal olav, and now he is an Einain? Ayin La'el, Siman Ayin Aleph, Sif Beis, that was discussed earlier in Siman Ayin Aleph, Sif Beis. L'kaman, Siman Tavkuf Memches, Besif Hey. Okay, we're going to break over here, Baruch Hashem. We are now officially only one day behind the Dirshu schedule, so hopefully we will be caught up in short order. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should stand God's Klal Yisrael in good stead. The Klal Yisrael should experience Yeshuas, Refuas, everything wonderful. B'chol makom shehem. I know that today, a lot of people have a lot of anxiety today. They're all worried about the election. And you know what? I happens to be that I'm very torn. I don't want to get political over here, but I know who I want to win. I know who I think would be better for the Yidden. I know who I think would be better for the country, even not just for the Yidden. I think I know who would be better for the country. But I'm torn, because in one way I say to myself, maybe it would be better that the other guy should win. Why? Because al tiftechu b'nedivim. I'm afraid that there are too many Yidden that are putting their hopes and putting their trust in something chas v'chalila other than the Ribbono Shel Olam. And we have to be in a matzav where we put our trust solely in the Ribbono Shel Olam. So if the wrong guy wins, let's not all be tomorrow like, oy, what are we going to do? It's gefährlich. Same Ribbono Shel Olam that took care of us yesterday, same Ribbono Shel Olam that took care of us 100 years ago, the same Ribbono Shel Olam that took care of us throughout the Dirshu, the same Ribbono Shel Olam that always takes care of us, the Ribbono, that's who we look to take care of us. We don't look to anybody else to take care of us. We look to the Berurah Olam. That's it. Everybody, thank you so much for joining me. Be well.